my, what's going on? And Jesus telepathically was saying that it's okay. It's okay. And there was so much warmth and love coming from Jesus. And then surprisingly, my father that I grew up with, who I thought never ever loved me, he never said that. There was so much love and compassion coming from him. At the end of my life review, I had seen myself as a spiritual being, a being that was someplace else being told that it was my time to be born. I was being telepathically told to go back and tell everybody that I feel comfortable being able to talk about it with you, and which I really appreciate that, here you have a podcast to allow people that have had these kinds of experiences to come on. Very emotional.
Thank you.
For almost 30 to 40 years of my life, I couldn't talk about it.
This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, welcome everybody, and welcome to my guest, Lynn Arches-Rappaport. Hello, Lynn.
Hi, Heather. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you.
I am so happy to have you here. I read your story and I was just enthralled with it. You had a very scary and painful event that took place, and then you were lifted up out of your body. And you then had this really amazing experience with both God and Jesus. So why don't you take us to that day and share what happened?
Sure. So yes, it was pretty painful. I was in Puerto Rico, and so it's been about 40, my goodness, it's been almost 50 years ago, 48 years ago. And I was surfing with my boyfriend, and I misjudged the waves at that time. Thinking they were smaller, they were actually much bigger, overhead, really thick and crunchy. And long story short, which I write more about this in my book that's coming out, I was kind of thrashed underneath the water, pushed down by these big waves. And underneath, they call Puerto Rico Little Hawaii. And the reason they do that is because there's caves underneath. And if you get caught under these caves, it's very difficult to come back up out. And I kept thinking, the more I kept going under, I was going to get pushed down under the caves, and that was it. I wasn't going to make it back out. So there was a big rock that was sticking out of the ocean that I was being washed up towards. And I thought, well, if I could just climb to the top of that rock, then everything's going to be okay. But the waves kept pushing me against the big rock that were filled with sea urchins and rocks, and it was very, very painful. I got cut up. There were sea urchins in my fingernails and my body. And I'm climbing up. And as I'm climbing up and the waves are, pushing me against the rock, I'm praying to God. I'm saying, please, God, don't take me. I'm not worthy enough to go yet. And then the next thing I remember was I was pulled up through my head out of my body. And I was put on a wooden bench in front of a big white old-fashioned screen with a projector, a 35 millimeter projector that was in back of me. And I was hovering. I remember hovering over the seat. But I just want to back up just a little bit, Heather. Interestingly, even before that, the awareness as I was being pulled up out of my body was as if there were three parts of me that had separated. And I call it, the spirit part that went directly towards the bench. And then there was this soul part that I was observing everything that was happening. And I also saw my body at the same time that was drowning. And then all of a sudden, this soul part connected to the spirit, and the connection of the spirit and the soul were hovering over the bench, watching a life review with a tunnel that was kind of in back of the screen. And then I had Jesus that was to the right of the screen. And then I had my father that I grew up with to the left of the screen. And I sensed, I mean, it was so much that was going on that I was so aware of. I was also, too, able to see that there were a group of people that were coming to save me. Somebody had yelled, "Hey, there's a woman out there drowning. Let's go save her." So there were about 5 people that had lined up, basically risked their life to pull me out of the ocean. So I was observing that happening. At the same time, I was observing, and I was scared. I wasn't like, "Oh, this is so beautiful and wonderful," but I didn't know what was going on. I was 22 years old, and I was, what am I hallucinating? This is like a bad trip kind of thing. Where am I? What's going on? And Jesus telepathically was saying that it's okay. It's okay. And there was so much warmth and love coming from Jesus. And then surprisingly, my father that I grew up with, who I thought never ever loved me, he never said that. There was so much love and compassion coming from him that it confused me. It confused me for many years after I came back from that, trying to figure that out. But it also, too, was transformational. So I was experiencing this immense love from Jesus and then from my father. And also, too, I felt this kind of coagulated type of essence of beings that were at the end of the tunnel. And they kept repeating, "Is she coming? Is she coming?" And then there was this shadowy being that was going back and forth down the tunnel to let these coagulate. They were like, I'd known these beings before, and they had all kind of gathered to welcome me. And so the shadowy being was asking my father, "Is she coming?" And then he would look over at Jesus, and then Jesus, all of this interaction was telepathic. And Jesus would say to my father, "Well, we have to wait and see." And then he would tell the shadowy being, and the shadowy being would go down and tell I can't think of a better term to describe what it was I was feeling from what it was at the end of the tunnel. These beings that were there gathered together as one big essence to ask, "Am I coming? Am I coming?" And so the shadowy being would go back down the tunnel and let them know, "We don't know yet. We have to be patient and wait." Now, at the same time, there was this immense, powerful, white, bluish, like lightning light that was next to me. And I knew that right away that I didn't want to touch it. I could almost feel like if I reached out that I might get electrocuted or shocked or die or something because it was so powerful. But I also, too, knew that this must be, God or this divine energy that's responsible for holding all of us together here. I just knew that it was very, very powerful. And as I'm experiencing all of this, I'm also, too, watching my life review from that very moment, all the way back to interactions with people that I have said things or done things that were not kind or loving, that I also, too, felt their sadness, their pain, their hurt. I also, too, at the end of my life review, I had seen myself as a spiritual being, a being that was someplace else being told that it was my time to be born. And I was saying, "But I don't want to go. I don't want to go." And there was a voice that was saying, "But you have to go. These are the parents that you have chosen to learn your lesson of perseverance and resilience." And then the next thing, it stopped, and I could hear the film, the 35 millimeter film, as it's ending and it's hitting like something and clapping. I don't know if it was the waves that were making that sound, but in the experience, it felt like it was the film that I was hearing that was hitting. And then the next thing I knew, I was shot back into my body through my head. And the light that I experienced as this divineness, this, God, was throwing me back down. And that's how it felt, like warp speed back in my body. And I was being telepathically told to go back and tell everybody that I am that I am. And then somebody said, "Give me your hand," and it was somebody that was risking their life out on the rocks, and I was passed down in a chain. And then I was laid down on the beach. I was all bloody. I had sea urchins in me, and I was in total shock of what was going on. And somebody had went to get my boyfriend out of the ocean. He was out there surfing, and he came in and saw me and came to me. And I just remembered trying to tell him what was happening to me. And he had said, don't ever tell anybody that, because they'll lock you up in a mental institution. And then I passed out, went into shock, and they rushed me, to the hospital, kind of thing.
It's such an incredible story. And, you were describing so many different elements that were to it. One of the things that stood out to me is I don't hear a lot of near-death experiences where they experience both God and Jesus. And you described them very differently, but I was wondering if you could tell us more about the contrast between the two, because Jesus seemed very loving and God was almost more stern, it seemed like.
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, I see, I've been asked a couple of times, well, was it Jesus or was it Christ? For me, I was raised a Catholic, so I'm sure that there's, we have those imprints that we're pulling from our mind in order to make sense of our world. And I always reflected back at that, was it Jesus that was there, and maybe instead of Buddha or somebody else? Because that was who I felt safe. And I knew that no matter what, that Jesus was always going to love me as a child. And so the Jesus that I experienced in my near-death experience was the teacher Jesus. And completely different from the energy that I was experiencing as this white light that I felt was, they were connected. There was a connection to it, but to me, it was definitely separate in the experience I was going. But we were all connected to this white light, is what I was experiencing. Everything. I mean, I was seeing, lack of a better word, it just seemed like there were many dimensions or many different filters that were happening at the same time that I could experience and be able to identify with what was going on. The people that were trying to save me, my experience with, my father, the shadowy being, Jesus, God, animals, people in India that were crying and they didn't have clean, safe water to drink, animals that were running away, from a fire that was happening. And these were all happening at the same time as I'm going through this experience that I was aware of. And I do go into more detail in my book also too about this.
That is fascinating that you saw these other events taking place in the world at the same time. I'm going to ask a question because people always want me to ask this question, but I'm going to preface it by, you almost alluded to this a bit already in your last answer. And I have a feeling that Jesus appears to us the way we want him to appear to us, but I'm curious what he looked like to you.
Well, both my father, I mean, what I experienced visually, or um, it's kind of like a very faint cloud, colored cloud. So Jesus was kind of in a cloud, probably a plasmic being, um, and had, different colors that represented. He had, the Jesus picture I grew up with, a clean kind of face with a long kind of brown shoulder length hair, 30, late 20s, 30th, 30 looking, very handsome, hippie kind of looking guy with his um, sandals, brown sandals on, and this many different colors of like a shawl or a veil that he, put over his body, with just a tunic, and then had, like a veil or cloth that was over it. And then my father also too was kind of in a shadow, a cloudy, very faint cloudy, where all the colors were kind of coming in together, but there was definitely a form that it was creating, where he was, wearing brown and green, and he was a young man in his 20s, from a picture that I had seen as a child when I had known him.
You also later figured out who that shadowy figure was.
Mm-hmm.
Who was that?
So in my book, I go into a lot of detail about this, but the shadowy figure actually ended up being my real biological father. And how I had discovered that was through DNA testing. It was my son, my oldest son, who was getting married, and they did DNA testing. And my father that I grew up with was French and Irish. So that would mean I would have 25% French, and my son should have at least an 8% French. And so when his results came back, he called me up and said, "Mom, I thought you said your dad was French." And I said, "Yeah, he is. Why?" He said, "I don't have any French." I said, "Well, that's silly. I mean, that's a racket. They're trying to fool you. They're pulling a fast one over you." So I went and had the test done also, and I had no French. But I had a message from somebody that I would later learn was my half sister, Melissa, and she had sent me a message saying, "Gee, I thought this only happened on television, but I'm your half sister." And I was like, "What?" I was so confused. I mean, I couldn't even imagine. Like I wasn't even like putting it to get two and two together that it was my mother. I kept thinking, my father. What did he do? How is this possible? And then all of a sudden there was a thought that came to me, that to ask, who was your father? And so when she told me the name, I then contacted my mother. I called her up and asked her if she knew who he was. And she said, "No, I don't." And she was very strange on the phone. And she said, "I've got to go." And that was like, she hung up on me, and I called her back and I said, "Mom, you do know this person." I said, "Is he my father?" And this was 5 years ago. I just found out.
Wow.
So, and she said, "Yes." She said, "But you're not supposed to know." She said, "You always stick your nose in places where they shouldn't be." And I said, "Mom, this stuff happens all the time. There's nothing to be she had a lot of shame around her.
Right.
And so I said, "You have to be shameful about this. We can talk about this." She goes, "No, your father and I made a pact never to tell anybody that you weren't his kid." And I said, "Well, you just told me. So it's true that, this other gentleman is my biological father." And she said, "Yes." So, yeah. And so I ended up meeting my two half sisters, Melissa and Tammy. And they had brought an 8x10 photo of our father, and two big shopping bags of photos to catch me up on who my biological father was. And when they pulled out the photo of our biological father, I looked at that, and all of a sudden, I mean, telepathically, I was told that's the shadowy being. That's the shadowy being in your near-death experience.
So your biological dad was the go-between, and they were asking whether you would live or die. And I was curious what you thought determined that. Was it the rescue taking place below? Was it God making that choice?
No, that's a good question. I've thought about that. It definitely wasn't me. I mean, I think that I was the one who was judging myself if I was worthy enough to go and to be there, and I feel that it was something more divine and bigger than me, basically, that was making that decision if it was my time to cross and go through the tunnel to the other side.
And at the end of the tunnel, there were people or spirits there. And were those relatives? Who do you think those people were?
I think those were ancestors and friends and people that I had known, throughout my many lives that I have probably, lived. I mean, I feel like when we incarnate, we carry a lot of baggage with us. Not just our personal immediate family baggage, but, many lifetimes of ancestors that we're working through. So I feel like they were a combination of ancestors, friends, lovers that I had met over time through the different lives I had experienced with them.
I imagine that they don't just wait around for you, but they're usually off doing various things and then they gather in a situation like this. Would that be the case?
I think energetically there must be something that has kind of pulls them to know. I mean, sometimes I feel like, like my mother who has passed or my father, I sometimes wonder if they're out there on a balcony kind of looking over and saying, Lynn, all you got to do is just call on me. Just ask. I'm waiting. Come on, call on us. So I really do believe that we here on earth, if we want help from the spiritual world, it's our responsibility to energetically be able to make that connection, to call, and also to just to give thanks and be grateful for what it is that we're experiencing. But I don't know, did I answer your question, or I
Yes.
kind of went on a crosstown bus there?
Yes, you did. In your life review at the very end, you actually saw your life before you came to Earth. Can you give us more details about that?
Yes, I can. I oftentimes don't talk about that because people go, "Oh, that's so crazy," when I have.
That's okay. We like crazy here.
So yes, I actually saw myself as a young girl. I must have been maybe 10 or 12. And I was riding on a white horse. And it was all in a very cloudy kind of vision that I was seeing. And I didn't want to leave riding on the white horse to go and get born. So that was what I saw.
It doesn't sound that crazy. It's really interesting. There was a being there that was talking to you and telling you, no, you got to go. You agreed to this. Who was that being?
I didn't, it was a telepathic communication in my vision. So I'm telepathically in my experience, I'm, communicating with Jesus, and I'm telepathically hearing what my father is saying to the shadowy being. And then, of course, God, who puts me back in my body, is telepathically telling me, I am that I am. But in my life review, this being that's telling my spirit being before I'm being born, I'm telepathically hearing or feeling, sensing something in my body, that they're communicating with my spirit child. I didn't feel that it was God. I felt that it was some other entity that was somehow helping in the process of being reincarnated again and making it clear that in that time of being born, why it was that it was important for me to be born.
In your experience, you did feel love from your father. You also had Jesus there, who is very comforting. Why do you think you felt scared?
Well, it was scary. I mean,
Because so many people say, oh, they feel peace and it's
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah,
And so I thought that was interesting.
yeah. I mean, it during the experience, it was peaceful, but because I think that it was something I didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what it was I was experiencing. You know, being drowning, I knew I was drowning, but to be able to experience all of this, be able to witness my drowning, being able to witness me being saved, being able to witness other, you know, the animals running from fire, people not having clean water. I mean, I I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't understand what was happening. So that part for me was scary. That was I would say it was kind of very anxiety type of fear, just like you know, what am I dying? What's happening? Why am I, you know, did I bang my head so hard that I'm hallucinating? You know, type of thing.
Do you have an idea of why you were shown animals running from a fire in India, not having enough water?
I don't know, but I do know that when I came back, I mean that I over the years I have formed my own foundation called Women for Water, where I help women in third world countries be able to have clean, safe water to where they don't have to walk for miles and miles and miles, but they can utilize clean, safe water right in their village, and their children can get an education. So they're not spending all their time looking for water. I do a lot of service work around water. I sit on the board of Bridge H2OPE, Bridge to Hope. It's an organization that we try to bring clean, safe water to Ethiopia so that young children don't have to look for water, that they can then utilize clean, safe water and get an education. Um,
I think that that is the answer to why you were shown that.
right. Yeah.
God told you to tell people, I am that I am. What does that mean?
Yeah. What does that mean? That's the big question, right? For years and years and years, I was like, what? How am I going to do this? This is like, what does that even mean? I am that I am. And I remember it like about probably 5 years ago, a dear friend of mine, Christy, and we were walking and I was sharing my story to her. And all of a sudden she stops and she says, Lynn, do you know what that means? I am that I am. Do you know where that comes from? I mean, that's like Moses, right? I said, yeah. She goes, wow, that's incredible. I said, yeah. I mean, I'm just like, how do you deliver that kind of message? I think for me, what I've realized over the years is that it's my own personal experience. I mean, it's a message for me, and to be able to share that, for me, it just means that there is no one way of believing. That God is many different ways, many different beliefs, and that what's really important is that we are connecting with the divine. And the only way we can connect with the divine is if we're doing our inner work, whether that's through meditation, whether that's through prayer. And I think that, and I would always pray, like, how do I do this, God? How do I tell people this message? And I kept patient, your time, you'll know. And I think probably just sharing my story, and in today's world when there's so, whether you have this side that's, not very kind, not very loving, not very compassionate. But then you've got all these other people that are very kind and very compassionate and very loving. And I always feel like if we can utilize that energetically to where we can raise and really reach, instead of bringing ourselves being pulled here into the darkness, but let's go into the light by being kind, by being compassionate, by being loving. And I think that that's a lot of the messages that, people that have near-death experiences that we keep coming back with to tell people that really the way for the evolution of humanity is to be kind and compassionate and loving with each other.
That is absolutely the message that I hope goes out to people that are watching my podcast. I always, talk about to be more loving, to be more kind. I always say empathy, but it's the same thing as compassion. And if we can do those things, we really can change the world. When we were talking about what God said to you, I am that I am, didn't he also say something like time is of the essence?
Oh, right. Yes. Thank you for that.
And so tell me about that. What did that mean?
For me, the message was that if I'm going to deliver the message, it's not like I have a lot of time to be able to do that. But to also, too, when I deliver the message, that I will know when the time feels right, which I feel now the time is right. I feel comfortable being able to talk about it with you, and which I really appreciate that, here you have a podcast to allow people that have had these kinds of experiences to come on. Very emotional.
Thank you.
I mean, for almost 30 to 40 years of my life, I couldn't talk about it, unless somebody else had experienced it. So for a non-experiencer to support a place, it's like IONS giving a place for people that have these kinds of experiences to be able to talk about it and feel like, there is a collective community that supports them in what it is that they have experienced. We don't know why. We can't say that your experience is not real when that person has experienced it. And so I'm very grateful to be able to come on and be able to have this place to be able to feel comfortable to share my story, because it also too helps me work through what are the messages, because it still continues. I still find something that goes, oh, that's what that might have meant, when I was going through that experience, because it's more real. But that experience for me is more real than what I'm experiencing here on Earth.
It's so incredible when people say that, and nearly all near-death experiencers say that about the realness. And thank you also for your kind words and just expressing that. When I was listening to you, I jotted something down. It really caught my ear when you talked about our spirit and soul being separate, because I just talked to somebody yesterday that I was interviewing, and his name is Bruce. And he also talked about his spirit coming out, but initially his soul was still with his body. And I had never heard that before. I've always used them interchangeably. Do you know what the difference between the two of them is?
Well, I'm still trying to actually figure that out myself. But there's many different, there's Eastern Hinduism, Buddhism type of way of looking at that. There's the Western traditional religion. I think for me, what it meant was that the spirit is our connection to the divine. And so immediately after it leaves the human vessel, it immediately goes back to the divine spark that it comes from. And then the soul is who, our will, our emotion, our consciousness, our mind. And it kind of, I know in anthroposophy that Rudolf Steiner is the philosopher of founder of anthroposophy. Mysticism way of looking at it is that the soul goes off and kind of by itself kind of utilizes and relearns what it needs to learn for its next life before it comes back to the spirit. But the spirit automatically is attracted to the divine. So wherever the divine is, that's where it's going to go. So in us, we have that spirit, which shines outside our body, where, so many people can say that they see auras or colors, and that's the spirit that's actually, I believe, that's shining out. And also, too, the spirit is what we connect with when we go inside and connect that spark to the divine, to God, to nature, to whatever somebody might want to call it. And that the soul is kind of our personality, who we are, that makes that up.
That's exactly what Bruce said, that the soul is our personality. And you've really elaborated on what he said. I always find it very interesting when I'll talk to somebody and they'll describe something, and then very shortly after that, somebody else will say the same thing. And it's almost like, God saying, okay, this is important. Pay attention to this.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you. One thing that's kind of interesting that I heard you say is that when you bump into some people, you'll get a flash and you'll know that you had a past life with them. Can you describe that?
It's a warmth. It has a lot to do with warmth and a certain kind of density, kind of in the solar plex area. Sometimes I'll see colors, but it's more of a knowing and a warm feeling. I mean, sometimes it's not always a good feeling. Sometimes I've experienced that a couple of times with people where it was like, okay, there's a certain kind of darkness and I'll back away. I'll disconnect. And then there are other people, and I've met one or two people that have felt the same, like we've both agree that we've been in a past life together, type of thing. And we've reconnected in this life and, supporting and loving each other on our journey as we had before in our last life. So it's mostly, it's a very warm, joyful, uplifting feeling of being really interconnected, kind of entangled.
Really interesting. You were told that you came here in this life to learn perseverance and resilience. So who told you that? And can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, that was that voice I had heard telepathically telling my spiritual child the reason why I needed to be born into my parents. I don't know who it was that told me. It was definitely a being, some higher being that physically I couldn't see, but I felt telepathically the voice was being told that. That's what was my lessons. I definitely feel that I have learned those lessons,
So do you think we each come down with specific lessons that we are meant to learn, and that each lifetime there would be different lessons that we need to learn?
I mean, I feel that for myself because that was my experience. And then I've also, when I have conversations with other people that have near-death experiences, I mean, some people feel there were contracts that they created with other people. I don't know, but I know that in my experience, that's the way that I live my life, thinking that, yes, I was born to experience what I had to experience because I had these certain lessons that I had to learn. And there were people that I meet that I'm supposed to meet through synchronicity, serendipity, that have messages for me if I'm awake to that message, and there might be messages that I have for them, that if they're awake to that, we're meant to connect, to help each other along our journey on what it is that we're here for. And I think that for me, the biggest part is, trying to remember who I am, why I'm here.
It was interesting that you left your body while you were still alive. And so I'm curious what that means in terms of, I guess what I'm getting at is when we see somebody suffering before they die, maybe they've been in an accident or something. Do you think that's, that we do leave our bodies early enough to avoid some of that pain?
Yeah. Well, I believe in a loving God. So I believe that God would pull us from that tragic suffering and pain, hopefully, to where we wouldn't have to experience that. I know that when I left my body, the pain, I didn't feel anything. I didn't have a body. The sense my senses were totally different. I felt like I had different organs in a different way that I was sensing, as opposed to my physical body that was sensing and suffering from the pain type of thing. So I would like to think that yes. I mean, there was recently a student of mine that had just died in a motorcycle accident. And a very unusual accident. He was 20 years old, and he was driving at night and had hit a moose that had come out of the woods. Just a really rare incident, but I felt that he didn't feel anything. He had left his body and did not feel the pain and the impact of. And also, too, I feel he was being called to do other work someplace else, to be taken from this earthly life, for such a young age, and then to have to experience such a trauma like that is just so unusual, of why something like that in that moment in time, in that particular place, at that particular hour, happened for that individual, that I would feel, I do feel that he had left his body to where he didn't feel that impact. He had left before the actual impact. And yeah, I do feel that, I don't know if that's true for everybody, but I would like to hope that in really tragic accidents like that, instead of having to go through such pain and suffering, that we would be, pulled from our body at that time. Some people say, I've heard some people say that they come, that's a contract that they have to endure that kind of pain and suffering in order to educate, humanity on its evolution. I don't know. I can only speak from my own personal experience, that then creates a model or an idea for me to believe.
Right after this happened, you told your boyfriend that you had this experience, and he said, "Stop talking." How did that affect you? Because you said that it took you a while to get comfortable sharing this.
Right. Well, I didn't talk about it for years. I worked in my own independent, introverted way, researching, Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner were some of my first interactions. And then I started reading, Dannon Brinkley, Betty Eddy. These books about near-death experiences, where then I started to feel like, oh, wow, there's somebody else that has these similar, I'm not crazy. When I look back at that, what he said, the poor guy must have been scared. Here he is, his girlfriend's lying on the ground dying, that he's brought on a trip out of the United States, Puerto Rico, to Puerto Rico. And he doesn't know if I'm alive or I'm dead. And also too, back then, he's trying in his own way to protect me. Don't talk about this kind of stuff because people will think that you're crazy. That was true. That unfortunately, it, which I think also too, there has been research that shows that people that have near-death experiences, when they come back, oftentimes it's hard to be with the same partner. They have a difficult time understanding what it is that they went through. So our relationship, we had been in a 5-year relationship, and after that, I think it was maybe 6 months, I had left that relationship because I realized that this was somebody I couldn't share my experience with, that I couldn't talk about it. And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to find out what it was. I wanted knowledge. I wanted to figure out that I wasn't crazy, that I did experience this. So.
Dannion Brinkley, Betty Eadie, those were some of the first books I read as well.
Yeah.
These days, you are in a constant dialogue, you've said, with Christ, with God. So what does that look like in your life?
I think it's probably just a constant prayer and meditation that I, live my life waiting to feel or sense, like how my day's going to go, what I, might need to do, what I might need to interact with or, see or say. So I'm, go into meditation waiting for a message oftentimes.
I know a lot of people are going to want to connect with you. So, Lynn, what is the best way for them to do that? And then also tell us more about this book because it sounds just incredible.
Well, definitely they can connect with me on LinkedIn, Lynn Arches-Rappaport on LinkedIn, Instagram. I have a Facebook. I do have a book that will be coming out hopefully soon that will be talking about, it's a memoir talking about my childhood experience and how as a young child I did sense that my father was not really my father and how that all kind of came together and was very transformational for me when I understood that I basically had been living a lie my whole life. And then once I found out, the lie the light was shown on the lie, so to speak, that my whole world started to make sense, why I was missing red flags or why I didn't see this, because I basically had kind of blinded myself, been taught to not see things because of my childhood upbringing. So it talks about my transformation, and hopefully that will be coming out soon. And they'll find out, and they can, if they're following me on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, because I'm actually building a platform where I'll be announcing that when it's out.
People will be watching this in the months and years to come. So as soon as you have that book information, let me know, and then I'll add that information into the description.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Before we leave, is there one thing from the things that we've talked about today that you really hope people took away from our conversation?
One thing, well, kindness.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
Kind.
I agree. I think that is truly, one of the most important things that comes out of these near-death experiences. And what I love is I can see, I didn't know you before your near-death experience, but I just see how transformed people are by these experiences. And you're all such kind and loving people that you really walk your talk. And I think that's one thing that really convinces me of the reality of these experiences that you and others are sharing.
Well, thank you for allowing us to be able to share them. Like I said, such an honor to be here, Heather.
Well, I am just thrilled that you are here. I've enjoyed this conversation so much, and I'm so glad that you are sharing your story because, you are the one that's, reaching so many people as they learn more about these experiences. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, did I enjoy Lynn. What a great guest. There was just so much to her story. She's just a wonderful person as well. I loved our Q&A as she expanded on things. I would love to know your thoughts. So in the comments, please share what stood out to you or share what was new information to you, because there were definitely things that were new, or at least, you don't hear very often. And one of those was when she was having her life review, she actually saw the time just before she was coming to Earth. And I thought, wow, that is so fascinating. I also love that she was discussing the difference between a soul and a spirit. It stood out to me because Bruce, that I had on last week, he was saying the exact same thing, but she expanded on it more. I will have a link to Bruce's episode, which is also wonderful, in the description for you to find. So just share whatever it was that stood out. Maybe it was when God told her to share, I am that I am. And then I really loved when we were discussing it and she was, breaking it down a bit more. That was really interesting to me as well. There was just so much to it. Everything she saw, what was happening below her, what was happening in the sky as she was kind of floating above the scene. I really, really loved it. The tunnel, her father's, there was just really a lot to it. So I really appreciate your comments. Anything that you want to say, even if it's just I made it to the end, any kind of a comment will help me. But I do really enjoy hearing those of you that share just something that stood out to you, or something from your own life that you wanted to share as well, or commenting about Bubbie. That's always nice as well. So I really appreciate all of that. I want to say thank you to those of you that have become members of my channel. I really appreciate that. For any of you that are interested, it's just a couple of bucks a month, no obligation. It's just there for some of you that want to do a little bit extra to support me. But again, don't ever feel obligated for that. But there will be a link in the description where you can find out more information on that. There's also a link in the description to buy merchandise if you want to get a t-shirt or something, a way to spread the word about this channel. And I do appreciate all of you that, mention this channel to other people, or you share an episode. That all means a lot to me. I will have all of Lynn's information in the description. That, of course, will include her book link once we have her book there as well. Something else I want to mention to you, there is a conference coming up February 20th and 21st. It's in Dallas, Texas. For any of you that are in the area, or any of you that want to travel to the area, it's called the Truth Tellers Conference. It's about near-death experiences, miracles, and also the transformational power of your truth. That'll be interesting to learn more about that. But really, really great speakers: Vinnie Tolman, Jeff Olson, Barbara Bartolome, Scott Drummond, and Cara Marlene. All fantastic people with just incredible stories. And to listen to somebody share their story when you're in the same room with them, it's really quite special. So I recommend it. But if you want to check out more, I've got the website right here on the screen. I'll also have a link in the description for you to find. Also in the description, you can find a link to all of my episodes, whether it's an upcoming episode like next week's or a past episode. You can find that. And of course, when I say next week's, it means once it comes out. But do always come looking for me. Either use that link or just type in Beyond with Heather Tesch. I do have a new episode that is out every single week. And boy, do I have a good one coming up. I've got lots of good ones, but there's a great guest that is coming up. So please stay tuned for that. And I hope to see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. Please add comments and questions you'd like future guests to answer. Also, if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. That'll help keep this podcast going. You can also go to Beyond with Heather Tesch to look for more episodes.